The bear crossed the stream and followed the man. What happened next was a miracle. Have you ever witnessed a moment so extraordinary, so pure in its unexpectedness, that it left your heart pounding and your spirit lifted? Our story begins on a remote piece of land near the serene Yellowstone River, where thick pine forests sway in the crisp breeze and the waters run clear beneath the midday sun. A solitary man lived there, haunted by memories he could barely carry and searching for something he could not yet name. In this quiet sanctuary, a chance encounter with a wild bear would challenge everything he thought he knew about fear, friendship, and the miracles hidden within everyday life. Daniel McMillan was not born in the wilderness, but after a life of loss, he had chosen to leave the noisy world behind. He settled on a modest plot of land near the Yellowstone River, close enough to the world's first national park to sense its raw majesty, but far enough away to live in peace. Locals who occasionally saw him in town knew him as a quiet soul in a flannel coat, wearing scuffed leather boots and an old Stetson hat. They said his eyes often appeared distant, as if something dear had been taken from him, leaving a void too cavernous to fill. His cabin, constructed from sturdy logs cut generations before, held the scent of age and the lingering fragrance of pine. It stood on a raised patch of earth near a small stream that wound its way down to the larger Yellowstone. The roof was adorned with a thin carpet of moss, and ferns curled up at the corners where sunlight failed to reach. Inside the cabin, a single cast-iron stove glowed on cold nights, painting the wooden walls with fleeting shadows. A small table, a bed, a bookshelf containing old maps, and an overstuffed armchair completed the decor. The windows looked out onto the stream and the surrounding pines, offering a glimpse of mountains that turned purple in the late afternoon light. Daniel rose each morning at dawn. He would step outside, breathe in the mountain air, and feel the crispness that came with each new day. His routine was almost sacred, tending to the woodpile, checking the door for any signs of raccoons rummaging in the night, and filling a kettle to boil his morning tea on the stove. These small tasks grounded him, anchoring him to a life that was simple, predictable, and safe. It had not always been that way. In his younger years, Daniel had been a teacher at a high school in Bozeman, guiding teens through the intricacies of literature, trying to spark in them a love for words and a thirst for the broader world. He believed in second chances and bright horizons. But one fateful winter, his world collapsed. His wife, Caroline, lost her battle against a sudden illness. The life they had built together, marked by laughter, road trips, and gentle dreams, vanished like a breath in the cold. Unable to face old, shared memories at every turn, Daniel disappeared into the wilderness, hoping the vastness of nature might absorb his grief. Over time, the cabin became his haven, a place where he need not explain his sorrow. Here, among towering pines and gentle streams, he could exist with his morning tucked safely out of sight. It was a place where silence was a comfort rather than a reminder of what he had lost. Days passed in quiet rhythms. For company, Daniel kept a leather-bound journal in which he scribbled thoughts that visited him in the half-light of dawn or the hush of evening. When he felt especially adventurous, he would explore deeper into the forest, fishing along the river or foraging for berries. Occasionally, he ventured into the nearby town of Livingston for supplies, flour, sugar, lamp oil, and the rare indulgence of store-bought bread. He moved through the aisles with careful steps, exchanging polite nods with the locals who recognized him but never pried. In this solitude, the natural world became both friend and teacher. He learned to distinguish the squeak of a squirrel from the scraping cry of hawks overhead, to read the footprints of deer near the water's edge, and to sense the shifting patterns of weather in the wind. When storms raged, buffeting his cabin with rain and hail, Daniel felt oddly safe inside those log walls, as though the raging elements mirrored the tumult within him. Yet, beneath the surface of this quiet life, an unspoken yearning grew, an undercurrent pulling him towards something beyond mere existence. He did not yet know it, but life had a strange and powerful encounter in store for him. An encounter that would remind him how thin the line can be between fear and kinship, isolation and communion. For now, he moved through his peaceful days, not suspecting that the forests and streams he held dear were about to deliver a visitor unlike any other, one who would bring both danger and unexpected wonder to his door. In the heart of the pines, something stirred, a presence that watched from the shadows, both curious and cautious. Daniel might have felt it in the hair on the back of his neck or the sudden quickening of his pulse. In time, he would meet this presence face to face, forever altering the quiet sanctuary he had so carefully constructed. And in the swirl of events that followed, a small miracle would bloom like a wildflower in the rocky soil of his life. It began on a crisp morning. The sun, a pale gold disk, rose over the mountains, its rays filtering through the dense canopy of pines. Daniel was crouched by the stream, rinsing out a small pan from his previous night's supper. A soft melody of rushing water and birdsong floated in the air. He usually found solace in such moments, relishing the quiet communion with nature before the day's tasks began. But on this particular morning, he felt an unshakable sense that something was nearby. He raised his head, scanning the tree line. The soft hush that fell over the forest was almost unnerving. Even the birds seemed to pause their chatter as though sensing an unfamiliar presence. Then, in a swift and purposeful movement, a dark shape emerged from behind the trunk of a towering pine. It was a bear. The creature was massive, its dark fur thick and coarse, its body heaving with quiet power. Daniel's heart hammered in his chest. He had encountered bears before, but always at a respectful distance, a glimpse of black fur moving among the thickets or fresh tracks in the mud near the water. Never had he found himself so close, eye to eye with such a formidable being. Time seemed to slow. Daniel's immediate instinct was to step back carefully, following the advice hammered into him by years of wilderness caution. Do not run. Make yourself seem large. Back away slowly. His mind screamed with questions. Was the bear hungry? Was it guarding cubs? Had something drawn it toward him, perhaps the scent of leftover food? With trembling hands, he set the pan aside and began to move back toward his cabin, never taking his eyes off the silent observer. The bear, however, did not rush or show overt aggression. Instead, it watched him with deep, inscrutable eyes that seemed almost curious. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as the animal released a short, rumbling grunt. Then, in a single graceful movement, the bear turned and lumbered back into the shadows from which it came, leaving the forest to slowly resume its chorus of rustling leaves and birdsong. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. He stood frozen in place for long moments, trying to remember how to breathe. Seeing bears from a distance was one thing, but this encounter felt like a moment of quiet communion, an unspoken message. Yet fear warred with fascination. He wondered why this creature had approached. Bears in the region were hardly docile, and curiosity alone seldom brought them so close. Eventually, Daniel returned to his cabin, determined to be more vigilant. He secured his food supplies in metal containers, mindful that a bear's keen sense of smell could detect even the faintest aromas. He went about the day on edge, expecting at any moment to see the dark shape lurking between the pines. But the forest offered only the usual symphony of life: squirrels scuttling, the chirp of distant birds, the rustle of wind through branches. By nightfall, Daniel had almost convinced himself that the morning's encounter was a fluke. In bed, however, he struggled to sleep. The image of the bear lingered in his thoughts. He had stared into the animal's eyes and seen neither rage nor fear. It was as if they had acknowledged each other's existence without the usual boundaries between man and beast. That subtle connection haunted him. He recalled the wise words of a park ranger he once knew: "Wild animals can sense your intention. If you respect them, they often respond in kind." Could that have been at play here? For the next few days, Daniel proceeded with caution. He carried bear spray on his walks and made occasional noises to announce his presence when venturing into thick brush. He took extra care to clean up the cooking area outside his cabin. He tried not to let his mind wander to the possibility of another face-to-face meeting, but the memory refused to fade. At odd moments, while chopping firewood or reading a passage of poetry by lamplight, he would recall the bear's deep-set eyes. They had reflected something beyond mere animal instinct, or so it seemed to Daniel. He felt a strange kind of pull, like a new path opening up in the silent forest of his soul. Perhaps the bear was a symbol of something he had yet to grasp, a sign that the walls he had built around his life were starting to crack. Then, one fateful afternoon, the invisible boundary between them shattered. Daniel was rinsing vegetables by the same stream when he heard the crunch of leaves behind him. His heart pounded, and he spun around to see the bear again. This time, the bear was closer, its gaze resting on Daniel's hands, where pieces of carrot and potato rinsed free of dirt. Daniel felt the world spin, every sense sharpened as though braced for a confrontation. Yet again, the bear simply watched. It made no move to attack, no sudden lunge. With trembling caution, Daniel spoke in a quiet, steady voice, as though the beast might understand. "Easy there, big fella. I mean you no harm." His heart hammered, but the bear just tilted its head slightly, the subtlety of the gesture impossibly human-like. Then, as if that silent acknowledgement were enough, the bear turned away again and walked off toward the denser part of the woods. Daniel stood there, hands dripping, a potent mix of terror and wonder surging through his veins. He had never been one to attribute human qualities to wild creatures, but the bear's behavior defied his expectations. No threat. No aggression. Just a calm curiosity, almost as if it recognized him. As the sun began to dip behind the mountains, Daniel realized with a start that his life was veering into uncharted territory, guided by a quiet presence that emerged from the trees. Something told him this was only the beginning. The days stretched longer as summer settled in. The air carried hints of sweet grass and warm earth, while the midday sun cast dancing patterns of light across the stream. Daniel began to notice subtle signs that the bear was lingering nearby. Fresh tracks pressed into the mud along the water's edge or overturned stones that revealed scurrying insects. Despite his initial fear, he found his dread slowly replaced by a cautious fascination. He found himself scanning the tree line at dawn and dusk, eyes searching for a dark shape among the green. Whenever he foraged for berries or walked along the narrow trails near his cabin, he carried a sense of anticipation. He felt a growing need to encounter the bear again, to unravel the mystery of why it seemed drawn to him. Curiosity aside, he reminded himself of the real dangers. A bear was still a bear, capable of charging without warning. So he made sure to keep a safe distance. If he spotted tracks or heard rustling, he stayed alert. He kept his cabin door locked at night, a practice he had grown lax about in his solitude. He also meticulously documented each sign in his journal, the size of the paw prints, the time of day, and the bear's behavior. It became a ritual, allowing him to process his new reality. Eventually, the monotony of daily chores lulled him into believing that maybe the bear would stay away for a while. But one morning, as he patrolled the perimeter of his property to check for fallen branches, he noticed movement down by the stream. Standing at the water's edge was the bear, as imposing and mysterious as before. It sniffed at the air, and its gaze landed on Daniel the moment he stepped into view. Adrenaline surged through Daniel's body, but he fought against the old terror. Taking a deep breath, he stayed where he was, some 50 yards away. They stood in mutual stillness, the forest around them humming with life, the buzz of insects, the distant chatter of squirrels. Daniel raised a hand slowly, not to wave, but to signal a peaceable intent. The bear lowered its head slightly, an almost unspoken reply, though Daniel was unsure if it meant anything or if he was projecting his own feelings. Then, in a move that shocked him, the bear clambered into the stream, plunging its thick legs into the rushing water with effortless grace. The current swirled around its massive body, yet it waded with steady confidence, heading toward the cabin's side. Daniel's heart jumped. The bear was crossing onto his land, bridging the divide that had thus far remained, man on one side, beast on the other. Water droplets glistened on the bear's dark fur as it heaved itself onto the bank. Daniel took a step back, unsure whether to flee or stand his ground. But the bear simply shook off the water, released a deep huff of breath, and looked directly at him. The distance between them was shrinking by the second. Suddenly, a flurry of images shot through Daniel's mind, memories of Caroline, of the quiet heartbreak that had driven him into solitude, of the way he felt forever at odds with the world. Could this moment, as terrifying as it was, somehow be a bridge, not just across the stream, but across the gulf in his life? His body tensed, every nerve on high alert. He could see the fine details of the bear's fur, the wet rivulets trickling down its sides, the intelligent gleam in its dark eyes. He made the conscious choice to hold still, forcing himself to breathe deeply. For what felt like an eternity, the two regarded each other, man and bear. Then, the bear dipped its head once more and turned toward the trees near Daniel's cabin. It padded through the brush and disappeared from sight, leaving Daniel alone again by the stream, stunned and breathless. How could he make sense of this? Wild animals did not simply show up at one's doorstep without reason, at least not in Daniel's experience. But as the morning sun rose higher, he realized that perhaps reason had little to do with it. Sometimes life offered encounters beyond logical explanation, enigmatic, yet teeming with meaning. He returned to his cabin with a trembling sense of awe and caution. Part of him wondered if he had stepped into a dream or if the quiet life he led had finally caused his mind to conjure fantasies. But the deep footprints in the soil and the lingering wet paw prints near the stream confirmed otherwise. It was real. Later that afternoon, he tried to distract himself by whittling a small wooden figure, a habit he'd picked up in the winter months, but his hands shook. He kept recalling the bear's eyes, the steady determination in its step, the almost gentle way it regarded him. Fear hovered like a specter over these thoughts, but another feeling pushed through, an odd, tentative hope. He thought of how often he had prayed for a sign, any sign, that life was not simply an endless succession of lonely days. Little did he know that the bear's visit was far from over. Unbeknownst to him, the animal had found something in Daniel's presence that echoed its own silent drive. There, in the hidden mosaic of nature's design, the paths of man and beast were converging. In the days to come, Daniel would realize that the bear was following him in a literal sense, a constant, watchful presence in the forest's shadowy folds. Their encounters would intensify, culminating in a moment that would forever upend Daniel's notion of reality. Perhaps, in that convergence lay the seeds of a miracle he was not yet prepared to face. The next few mornings brought a chill that hinted at early autumn. The leaves on nearby birches had begun to turn a pale yellow, though summer still clung to the afternoons. Daniel noticed that each time he left the cabin, whether to fetch water, gather firewood, or simply wander, there were fresh signs that the bear had passed through. He found paw prints trailing his own footprints along the path near the stream. In some places, they overlapped his steps. Small saplings bore the marks of the bear's claws, as if it had brushed against them while following Daniel's scent. The hair on the back of his neck stood up whenever he realized how closely the bear must be watching him. Yet, he never actually witnessed the creature in these moments, only evidence of its presence. Over the next few days, Daniel felt a mixture of unease and intrigue. Each time he bent down to collect water or check his fishing lines, he would glance back, expecting to see the bear peering at him from behind a tree. At night, he thought he heard noises, the crunch of leaves, a soft grunt, or the snap of a twig outside his cabin. He would rouse himself from bed, peer through the window, only to spot nothing but swaying shadows in the moonlit forest. He was on constant alert, but paradoxically, he found himself less afraid than he would have imagined. The fact that the bear had shown no aggression during their encounters left Daniel strangely reassured. The tension, however, remained, a living thing inside him. The bear was following him, of that he was sure, but why? One afternoon, he set out for a longer hike, deciding to confront his own apprehensions head-on. The day was bright and mild, the sky a wide expanse of turquoise behind the silhouettes of mountains. Daniel strapped on a small backpack with essentials, water, bear spray, a snack, and his journal, then set off into the woods. He followed a game trail that wound upward through stands of pine and across a narrow meadow. As he walked, he allowed his mind to wander. He recalled the day Caroline had first shown signs of illness, how a casual fever turned into something far more insidious. He remembered how small and powerless he had felt as the doctors delivered their grim prognosis. He had prayed, bargained, raged, but all in vain. The memory still held the power to bring tears to his eyes, and he blinked them away, focusing on the present moment. The forest, with all its living, breathing beauty, reminded him that life was constantly in flux, forever dancing between growth and decay. Just then, a snapping twig interrupted his reverie. He froze, scanning the forest behind him. Through the dense thicket, he caught the slightest glimpse of dark fur. His heart leaped. The bear was there, following him at a cautious distance. Instead of rushing forward or vanishing entirely, it appeared to be trailing him. The creature stayed partially obscured, but Daniel could feel its presence, a silent companion on his solitary journey. For reasons he couldn't explain, Daniel continued walking. Perhaps it was a silent understanding. If the bear wanted to approach, it would do so on its own terms. If it wished to remain hidden, Daniel would not force the encounter. With each step, he was acutely aware of every sound, the crackle of pine needles underfoot, the distant call of a hawk overhead, and the faint rustling of branches where the bear lightly pressed forward. By late afternoon, the trail led Daniel to a rocky overlook with a breathtaking view of the valley below. Clouds drifted in the golden sunlight, and the river sparkled in the distance. He let out a sigh, partially from relief, partially from awe. Carefully, he removed his backpack, retrieved his journal, and began to jot down his thoughts. He wrote of the bear, this silent guardian or perhaps pursuer that had woven itself into his life. He wrote of his late wife and how he felt her absence like a physical ache, even in moments of wonder. He wrote of hope, fear, and the mysterious sense that he was on the cusp of something monumental. Midway through a sentence, he heard another soft grunt. He looked up and saw the bear at the edge of the clearing, half concealed by tall grass. Its massive shape seemed to fill the space with quiet power, yet those dark eyes held an unmistakable gentleness, or so Daniel perceived. The hare stood on Daniel's arms, and he closed his journal, placing it slowly on the ground. They locked gazes. A sudden wave of emotion seized Daniel. He wasn't entirely sure why, but he felt an overwhelming urge to speak, even though it felt absurd. I don't know what you want, he said aloud, his voice trembling despite his efforts to remain calm. But I feel like maybe I need you. Or you need me. The sound of his own voice in the stillness was almost startling. The bear made a low, soft rumble but did not move closer. It simply existed in that space, as if granting unspoken permission to share in the wilderness on equal terms. For minutes that felt like hours, they remained locked in that silent communion. Finally, as the shadows lengthened, the bear walked back into the forest, and Daniel was alone once more. That night, as he returned to the cabin, Daniel felt a mix of elation and exhaustion. The encounter had moved him deeply, stirring old grief and forging a sense of connection he couldn't yet name. When he finally crawled into bed, the events of the day replayed through his mind like a vivid dream. He recalled the bear's eyes, the hush of the clearing, and that single moment when he dared to speak to a wild creature as though it could understand. Whether it was madness or something else, he couldn't say. Yet, as sleep overtook him, he sensed that the forest had whispered an invitation, urging him beyond the confines of his old grief and toward a new chapter of life. Somewhere in that liminal space between dreams and waking, he thought he heard Caroline's gentle laugh, as though telling him he wasn't alone. And perhaps, in ways too profound for words, she was right. Morning arrived with a hazy sunrise, the sky tinted pale pink and gray. Daniel woke to find his breath visible in the cool air. The crispness carried hints of the coming autumn, and he knew he should start gathering more firewood soon. Rising from bed, he performed his usual routine, stoking the stove, boiling water for tea, and stepping onto the cabin's porch to greet the day. Yet everything felt different. A living thread connected him to the forest. Beyond his threshold, he found himself lingering on the porch, scanning the tree line for any sign of dark fur. A part of him longed for another encounter, no matter how uneasy it might make him. That longing both exhilarated and confused him. For so many months, he had sought solitude, wanting to escape human company and the inevitable questions about his life and grief. Now, he found himself craving the silent company of a bear. He spent the morning splitting logs, the sharp crack of the axe echoing across the clearing. Each strike released tension he hadn't realized he was holding. His thoughts drifted to Caroline often, but it no longer felt like a descent into darkness. Instead, he found himself cherishing small recollections, her laugh during rainy afternoons, the way she danced barefoot in their living room, the warmth of her hand in his. Perhaps his experiences with the bear were opening a hidden door in his heart, allowing love and loss to coexist with a strange new joy. After lunch, Daniel noticed the sun shining warmly through the pines. He decided to take advantage of the pleasant weather and do some fishing downstream. Gathering his rod and a small tackle box, he made his way along a narrow path that skirted the water. The stream whispered beside him, sunbeams sparkling on its surface. The forest's hush enveloped him, and he felt an uncanny sense that he was exactly where he was meant to be. He found a good spot on a smooth rock and cast his line into the gentle current. Fishing, for Daniel, was never about the catch, though a fresh trout for supper was always welcome, but about the meditative calm it brought. He kept his eyes on the water, yet his thoughts remained half listening, half watching for that familiar presence. After a short while, he felt a tug on the line. He reeled in a modest trout, its scales shimmering in the light. Carefully, he removed the hook, whispered a small apology to the fish, and slipped it into a mesh bag. Another few casts yielded no results, and he was content to just sit, letting the afternoon sun bathe his shoulders. Then, a ripple in the water caught his attention. Looking up, he saw the bear again, on the opposite bank, watching him intently. The sight nearly made him drop his fishing rod. The animal's head tilted as though curious about what Daniel was doing. The stream separated them, but Daniel felt no less awestruck by the proximity. A familiar surge of adrenaline mingled with a cautious thrill coursed through him. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Daniel felt compelled to speak again, but words caught in his throat. Instead, he raised a trembling hand in greeting. The bear responded by stepping closer to the water, sniffing the air. Daniel braced himself, uncertain. Then, to his astonishment, the bear entered the stream, wading through water that reached halfway up its body. The current swirled and splashed, but the animal seemed unbothered, navigating the rocky bottom with calm dexterity. Daniel's pulse raced. He was on a relatively open stretch of shore, nowhere near the cabin, and if the bear chose to approach aggressively, there would be little he could do. But something in him refused to run. He sensed no hostility in the bear's movements, only a kind of calm intent. Stepping out of the water onto Daniel's side of the stream, the bear shook droplets from its coat. Daniel gripped his fishing rod, though he doubted it would serve much as protection. His mind raced through scenarios, each ending in tragedy if he misread the situation. But the bear merely looked at him, solid, powerful, yet oddly serene. Then, in a moment that took Daniel's breath away, the bear advanced a few more steps and paused, as if waiting. Daniel's body tensed, every muscle coiled. He could almost hear the pounding of his own heart, the rush of blood in his ears. He inhaled deeply, reminding himself that panic would help neither of them. An idea surfaced in his mind, though it felt almost absurd. Slowly, he reached into his tackle box, pulled out a piece of the leftover bread he had brought as a snack, and placed it gently on the ground in front of him. He then retreated a couple of steps, maintaining a cautious distance. Was it wise to feed a wild bear? Definitely not, according to standard advice. But in that moment, reason took a backseat to instinct and an inexplicable sense of trust. The bear regarded the bread, then looked at Daniel. After a tense moment, the bear stepped forward and sniffed the morsel. It lowered its massive head, nudged the bread with its nose, then scooped it up with a surprisingly delicate motion of its mouth. Daniel exhaled, relieved that the bear didn't see his offering as a threat. In that singular gesture, man and bear shared a fragile, fleeting bond. For reasons Daniel couldn't articulate, tears welled in his eyes. He felt as though he were touching something raw and elemental, a living testament to connection across the most impossible divides. The bear, after consuming the bread, looked at him once more, then ambled off into the woods, leaving Daniel trembling on the shore. He waited a long while before packing up his gear, caught between wonder and worry. He had fed a bear, an act generally frowned upon because it could encourage dangerous habits in wild animals. Yet the calmness of the encounter suggested something else at work, something deeper than a mere quest for food. Daniel wondered if, in sharing that small piece of bread, he had somehow offered a piece of his own guarded heart, and the bear had accepted it without judgment, bridging a gap that spanned more than just the width of the stream. Walking back to his cabin with the trout in his bag, Daniel felt lightheaded, almost giddy. But a nagging voice in the back of his mind reminded him that bears were unpredictable. Still, another voice spoke louder, a whisper of awe and gratitude for the unlikely gift of this connection. He couldn't shake the sense that these encounters were leading somewhere, as if each moment with the bear was unveiling a path that stretched far beyond his solitary life. Daniel woke before dawn, unsettled by vivid dreams that dissolved the moment he opened his eyes. He slipped out of bed and lit a lantern, the soft glow revealing the humble interior of his cabin. A restless energy coursed through him, urging him to start the day early. In the pre-dawn stillness, he stoked the fire, brewed a strong cup of coffee, and sat at the table with his journal. The recent encounters with the bear weighed on his mind, swirling together with memories of Caroline. As he flipped through the pages, he realized how his writing had changed. Once filled with sorrowful laments and self-imposed isolation, the more recent entries carried a tone of cautious hope. It was as though the bear had come into his life precisely when he was ready to step beyond his grief, beckoning him out of his shell and into the wild unknown. He turned the lantern off as the sky brightened and stepped outside, coffee cup in hand. The forest lay in a hushed half-light, dew shimmering on the grass like scattered diamonds. Daniel's heart felt full, yet a lonely ache persisted. He thought of how he had once shared his morning coffee ritual with Caroline, their banter sleepy yet affectionate. Now, he shared his surroundings with a wild bear, a companion beyond anything he might have imagined in his old life. That day, he made another trip to town. Though his visits had become less frequent, he needed basic supplies, flour, salt, some canned goods, and nails for minor cabin repairs. Driving the bumpy dirt road in his truck, he kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the bear loping behind. The mental image made him chuckle softly, a testament to how deeply the animal had settled into his thoughts. Livingston was a modest town that boasted a historic main street and an old railroad depot. Locals bustled about, greeting each other with easy familiarity. Daniel navigated the grocery aisles under the harsh fluorescent lights, a stark contrast to the peaceful glow of the forest. He gathered his items quickly, nodding politely to a few acquaintances. When the young cashier rang up his purchases, she asked if he needed anything else. For a moment, Daniel imagined telling her about the bear, but he hesitated. He could already picture her alarmed reaction and the flurry of advice to call the authorities or arm himself. Instead, he shook his head. "No, ma'am. This will be all," he said with a polite smile. After leaving the store, he wandered down Main Street to a small bookstore, a place he frequented back when he was a teacher. A stack of nature guides caught his eye, and he picked up a comprehensive volume about North American bears. The book was packed with photographs, facts, and safety tips. Impulsively, he purchased it. If he was going to continue encountering this bear, he wanted to understand it better. Returning to the cabin, Daniel spent the afternoon flipping through the pages. He learned more about the physiology, behavior, and typical habitats of bears in the Yellowstone region. While he found reassurance in the advice, he also realized that his situation was far from typical. He didn't want to reduce his experiences to a list of do's and don'ts. There was something intangible in their shared moments, a whisper of connection that defied bullet points. As dusk crept in, Daniel's mind drifted to the past. He remembered how Caroline used to talk about spirituality and nature, how she believed that every creature, every tree, every blade of grass carried a piece of the divine. "It's all connected," she would say, her eyes bright. "We're just too busy to notice." During her final weeks, she had found solace in the idea that life moved in cycles, that endings could pave the way for beginnings. Daniel had appreciated her optimism, even as he sank deeper into grief. Now, he wondered if she had been right all along. Maybe the bear was part of that grand tapestry, arriving when the time was right, acting as a guide for Daniel's fractured spirit. The notion felt both comforting and unsettling, as though the world might be more alive and aware than he had ever let himself believe. Before bedtime, he took a brisk walk around his property, lantern in hand. The moon hung low in the sky, bathing the clearing in silver. Night insects hummed, and the occasional hoot of an owl resonated among the pines. He half expected to see the bear standing at the edge of the forest, but he found only moonlight and the hush of sleeping trees. That night, Daniel dreamed of Caroline. In the dream, she stood on the opposite side of a stream, wearing a flowing white dress. She smiled, beckoning him to cross. He started wading through the water but felt the current grow stronger. Just as he was about to lose his footing, the dark shape of the bear appeared behind Caroline, as though guiding her steps. She mouthed words that Daniel couldn't hear, but he felt the warmth of her love radiating across the water. He woke with tears in his eyes, his heart beating like a drum. Though the dream unsettled him, it also filled him with a sense of wonder. Perhaps the lines between the living and the lost were not as rigid as he once believed. Perhaps Caroline's spirit lingered in the flicker of candlelight, in the hush of the pines, and even in the deep eyes of a wandering bear. With that realization, Daniel knew he couldn't go back to the life he had led before. The forest, the bear, the memory of Caroline, everything was converging in a way that demanded he open himself to the unknown. He didn't yet understand how or why, but he sensed that a revelation was drawing near, an unforeseen miracle waiting just beyond the next sunrise. Late summer gave way to autumn in a dramatic flourish. The pines remained evergreen, of course, but the aspens and birches turned vibrant shades of gold, their leaves fluttering like molten coins in the crisp breeze. The days were shorter, the nights cooler, and a sense of urgency filled the forest. Animals scurried about, preparing dens and stocking up on whatever sustenance they could find. Daniel felt that same urgency within himself. Each day, he ventured further from the cabin, as though searching for a place or a moment that would reveal the truth behind his extraordinary connection with the bear. Sometimes he found fresh tracks, other times he heard a distant grunt. But the bear never fully revealed itself. It was a dance of near encounters that left him both eager and anxious. One afternoon, gray clouds gathered over the peaks, and a breeze rippled through the treetops. Daniel felt a storm coming, the kind that rages with thunder and lightning before giving way to cold, steady rain. Rather than hunker down in his cabin, he decided to take a walk. Guided by an unspoken pull, he stuffed a waterproof poncho and flashlight into his backpack and set out, convinced that something awaited him in the deep hush of the woods. As he walked, the wind picked up, and leaves spiraled down, forming a gilded path. The first roll of thunder echoed in the distance. Still, Daniel pressed on, heading toward a ridge that overlooked a narrow valley. He had rarely ventured there, deterred by the steep incline and the dense undergrowth. But that day, he felt compelled, as if invisible hands were guiding him forward. The climb was arduous, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chill in the air. By the time he reached the ridge, the sky was a roiling mass of dark clouds, tinged with flickers of lightning. Rain spattered, and the wind whipped through the pines with a low, mournful howl. From this vantage point, Daniel could see the entire valley below, a tapestry of greens and golds stretching toward distant mountains. He scarcely had a moment to take in the view before lightning flashed, illuminating the forest in a ghostly white glow. The thunder that followed rattled his bones, as though the sky itself roared with furious energy. Daniel was about to turn back when he spotted movement among the trees below. Through the shifting light, he realized it was the bear, emerging from the undergrowth with a lumbering gait. Thunder boomed again, closer this time, and rain began pelting down in earnest. Daniel watched as the bear paused, lifting its muzzle to the air. Lightning flickered, revealing a sheer drop-off on the bear's left side, the ground slick with wet leaves and mud. A sense of foreboding coiled around Daniel's heart. The bear seemed disoriented, perhaps startled by the sudden storm. Without thinking, Daniel descended the ridge, slipping on muddy rocks. His heart pounded in time with the drum of raindrops. Why was he doing this? A part of him screamed that this was madness, that the bear was still a wild animal, unpredictable and dangerous. But a stronger force propelled him forward, a primal need to be near the bear in its moment of vulnerability. He reached a narrow ledge overlooking a ravine. The bear stood at the edge, rivulets of rain streaming down its fur, the wind flattening its ears back. Daniel could sense the bear's agitation. A crack of lightning tore across the sky, followed by thunder so loud it rattled his teeth. The bear roared, a sound of fear rather than aggression, and began to slip on the wet ground. Time slowed. Daniel watched as the bear lost its footing, hind legs skidding perilously close to the edge of the ravine. Without hesitation, he scrambled forward, arms outstretched, as though he could physically stop the massive creature. It was an instinctive, impossible gesture. But in that split second, nothing else mattered. The bear flailed, claws scraping for purchase on the soggy earth. In a miraculous stroke of luck, it found a root or rock to brace against, halting its slide. Daniel skidded to a stop a few feet away, his heart pounding so violently he thought it might burst from his chest. The bear let out a guttural sound, half snarl, half desperate cry. For one terrible moment, Daniel thought the bear might attack out of sheer panic. But instead, it dug its claws deeper, righting itself as the storm lashed around them. In that electric moment, the distance between man and beast narrowed to a trembling thread. Still shaking, Daniel raised a hand, palm open, in a gesture of calm. The bear stared back, a raw and primal presence that embodied all the untamed power of the wilderness. Another flash of lightning, another roar of thunder, and then, as quickly as it had begun, the bear turned away. It lumbered into the cover of nearby trees, leaving Daniel alone in the storm, with adrenaline coursing through his veins. For several moments, Daniel could do nothing but stand there, gasping for air and trying to steady his nerves. The near disaster replayed in his mind, the bear's frantic scramble, his own reckless attempt to intervene. If the bear had slipped further, it would have plunged down the ravine and likely not survived. If Daniel had gotten too close, he might have been mauled in the confusion. Yet neither tragedy occurred. Instead, they parted. In a moment that transcended logic, Daniel felt tears mingling with the rain on his cheeks. He wasn't sure if they were tears of relief, fear, or something deeper, perhaps gratitude for having borne witness to raw survival. In that instant, he understood that he could not remain a passive bystander in life. If he was to truly live, he had to be present, even in the face of peril. Shaken to his core, Daniel slowly climbed back to safer ground, the storm still raging around him. The sky's fury mirrored the tempest of emotions in his heart. He knew that something was shifting, as though the storm had heralded not just a clash of wind and rain but a collision of destinies. By the time he reached his cabin, soaked and trembling, he felt a profound sense of awe. His connection with the bear was growing more intense, bound by moments of quiet wonder and sudden terror. He thought of Caroline, of how she would have marveled at such an experience. Perhaps, in some hidden part of the cosmos, she was marveling right beside him. Dawn broke, calm and bright after the night's fierce storm, the forest glistening with raindrops that caught the early sun. Drawn by an inexplicable urge, Daniel stepped off his porch and followed a path through branches bowed by water, each step feeling both cautious and charged with possibility. Soon, he arrived at a small clearing and spotted the bear. Rain-soaked fur shimmered in the light, but the animal stood serene, watching him with dark, steady eyes. Daniel's heart pounded, yet he felt no fear, only a powerful sense that he was on the brink of something vital. He moved closer, keeping a respectful distance, and sank onto a fallen log. In that hush, the forest felt alive with breath. Daniel could almost sense Caroline's presence, her memory woven through the trees. Slowly, the bear approached. Just feet away, it regarded him with such calm that tears pricked Daniel's eyes. Without words, they shared a profound moment, man and bear, united by an unspoken trust. The bear tilted its head skyward and released a deep, resonant call, as if summoning every quiet corner of Daniel's grief into the open air. Warmth flooded Daniel's chest, and he realized he was crying, not from sorrow alone, but from an overwhelming gratitude and release. In the bear's call, he felt echoes of his own healing. A wave of acceptance passed through him, softening old wounds and reminding him of life's continual renewal. Then, just as gently as it had come, the bear stepped away, disappearing into the lush green. Daniel remained behind, kneeling on the damp earth. Though the clearing fell silent, he sensed that a miracle had taken place, a quiet transformation, binding him more intimately to the forest, to his memories of Caroline, and to the realization that love could outlast loss. He rose, heart lighter than it had been in years, ready to carry this newfound peace with him into whatever awaited beyond the trees. The autumn air turned crisp and bright. Yellow leaves glided to the forest floor as Daniel went about his days with renewed purpose. Though he still felt pangs of loss, he no longer let grief define him. His unexpected bond with the bear had gently eased him back into the flow of life. He glimpsed the animal from time to time, a dark silhouette among the trees, a distant shape fishing in the stream. But the fear that once knotted his stomach was gone. In its place, he felt only gratitude for the unspoken understanding that had grown between them. When he journaled, he no longer spilled only sorrow onto the pages. Instead, he wrote of hope, of seeing Caroline's memory in every leaf, every shaft of sunlight. On a mild afternoon, he hiked to a bluff overlooking the river, one of Caroline's favorite spots. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying echoes of her laughter. He stood there, remembering not just her last days but the countless small joys they once shared. Tears came, but with them came a gentle release, an acceptance that her spirit would always live on in the forest she loved. Sometime near dusk, he returned to his cabin. As he paused by the porch, the bear appeared at the tree-line, watching him calmly. Daniel felt a sense of quiet amazement. Without words or gesture, they acknowledged each other's presence, fellow beings who had walked a winding path toward trust. After a lingering moment, the bear slipped into the shadows, leaving Daniel smiling under a sky streaked with purple and gold. He knew that soon enough, the bear would enter hibernation, and he would pass the winter nights by the soft glow of his lamp, sipping tea and reflecting on how fear had turned into awe. He understood that miracles sometimes arrive quietly, entwined with love and loss, guiding us from isolation to connection. Inside the cabin, he stoked the stove and felt a peaceful warmth unfold within him. Yes, winter would come, but so would spring, and with it, the promise of new encounters, new paths, and a heart made whole by the gentle reminder that we are never truly alone. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the heart of a remote wood, where a solitary man and a wild bear shared an extraordinary bond that transcended fear. In the silent spaces between roars and whispers, Daniel rediscovered hope and acceptance, proving that sometimes, miracles emerge in the simplest moments. If this story touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up, share it with friends who love stories of resilience and nature, and subscribe to my channel for more immersive tales. Your support allows me to continue exploring themes of connection, personal growth, and the power of the human spirit. Together, we can celebrate stories that remind us of our capacity for love and transformation, even when life feels like an uncharted wilderness. Thank you, and I look forward to sharing more adventures with you soon.